Yeah, we're live. 7:52, a little late, but that's okay. Tonight was date night, so we got to go out and have some drinks and stuff. So it was awesome. Tonight I want to talk about injectors because I got an interesting question today from somebody, actually a discussion today, and the question was about their confusion about wheel horsepower versus flywheel horsepower, and it's understandable because we know that when somebody runs something on a chassis dyno and they run, if you run your truck or car or whatever, you run on the dyno, oh, it makes 250 at the tire. Okay, well, and then the question is naturally, well, okay, how much power do I need for that to make 250 horsepower? Well, that's not the real math. and this was his confusion. It took a little bit for me to be able to get him to understand this, but really it's actually quite simple. So the question is, how much, what size injector do I need to make a certain amount of power? And you guys know, we've talked about this before. Our little injector math formula is if you, particularly on a V8, you can multiply this out if it's on a 4-cylinder or a 6-cylinder or a 12-cylinder, if you happen to have a cool 12-cylinder, which would be awesome. But on a V8, what we do is we multiply whatever the flow rate of the injector is. 25-pound injectors, 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, whatever. We multiply that by 16 on a naturally aspirated motor. And the reason that we do that, and he didn't really understand this, is that it takes about a half a pound of fuel per hour to make 1 horsepower. So if it takes that, 1 full pound would be 2 horsepower. That's why we multiply it by 16. So if we got injectors that flow 80 pounds an hour, we multiply that by 16, we get 1,280 horsepower. That means if you have 80-pound injectors and you have 8 of them, and you have a naturally aspirated motor running at roughly a 0.5 brake-specific fuel consumption, which is what we use to do the simple math. That way the formula works out better. They will support 1,280 horsepower. Okay. So, and if we take a look at the other stuff, if you have a 25-pound injector, a fairly common size factory injector, and we multiply that by 16, that's 400 horsepower. If we double that, 50 pounds, that's 800 horsepower. You get some of the in-between stuff. 30 pounds times 16, 480, 40 pounds, 640. So we could support a lot of power like that. Now we went into on the live feed that we did on the injector stuff where we're talking about, okay, now what is it for boost? So if you take that number and you multiply the injector size by 16, you get your value. So if we got a 25-pound injector and multiply by 16, we got 400. So it will support 400 NA horsepower. In reality, it'll support a little bit more than that because almost no LS that I know naturally aspirated runs at a 0.5 brake specific. They're usually a lot more efficient than that. So you have some safety margin there. So if we have that number, if we multiply that number by 0.85, that gives us how much power we can make, how much power that injector will support, or 8 of those injectors will support on a boosted application. And the reason that it will support less power is because it takes more fuel to make the power boosted. The reason for that is let's say we're running at 13 to 1 naturally aspirated. We're running at 11 to 1 or 11.5 to 1 under boost. And so it requires more fuel to make any given power level. So we can make less under boost. I know we're making more power. It's a little bit harder to understand. But for any given power level, it requires more fuel under boost to make that power. That's why a naturally aspirated motor, when it's racing, it gets better fuel mileage than a boosted motor does at the same power level because it requires more fuel to do that. And if we multiply it by 0.75, we get a rough estimation of what that injector will support. 8 of those injectors will support on E85. So that's all fairly simple math. Like I said, take the injector on a V8, take the injector flow, multiply by 16. We got the NA power, multiply it by 0.85, multiply that total number by 0.85, gets us what we'll do under boost. Take that number, multiply it by 0.75, tells us what it will do under E85. But then the question becomes, here's where his confusion was. He goes, okay, I kind of get that. That seems to be fairly simple math. I didn't understand why you're multiplying by 16. That tells me that you have 16 injectors. I said, no, that's not what's happening here. I said, it's the 0.5 brake specific thing that's throwing you off. because we can make 2 horsepower. That's why it does that. So we have 8 injectors, but we can make 2 horsepower with each pound of fuel. He said, okay, I got that. But if I'm making 300 horsepower at the tire, I mean, that's only 300. So is it that, can I get away with a smaller injector? I said, well, no, you're not actually making 300. I said, if you run that motor on the engine dyno the way that we test it, let's say you're making 400. And then when you put it in a car or a truck, you have an automatic transmission, you got big tires and wheels, you got a big rear end, you got a drive shaft, maybe it's a 2-piece drive shaft, you have all the accessories on it, you're still making 400 horsepower. Doesn't matter that the chassis dyno is only showing 300 because you have all of these losses associated. You're consuming a bunch of that power. The motor is still making that power. We're assuming that it has the same tune and the same temperature and all that, but you're still making that same power. Maybe you've put all the accessories on it, like, because we don't run those on the engine dyno. You have a transmission, like I said, you have a torque converter, you got a rear end, you have big tires, you got all that. So maybe you're making 100 less on the chassis dyno that you made on the engine dyno. You're not making less power. You're making the same power. The motor is still making that same power, so it's still using that same amount of fuel. You don't see that number get spit out on the chassis dyno because you have a bunch of things that are using some of that power. They're absorbing some of that power, so you don't see it measured. It's still there. you're still, and the important thing for all of this is not the difference between a chassis dyno and an engine dyno, but the fact is you're still using that power. You're making that power, and these things are absorbing some of that, but you are still required to have the same amount of fuel for that power level. So when we're doing this injector math, we're doing it based on a naturally aspirated output or a supercharged or turbocharged output or a E85 output under boost. Your combination is still required to have that amount of fuel flow because you are still making that power, even though it's showing less on a chassis dyno. So you still have to have that fuel flow. You have to have the same, you have to have a pump that's capable of doing that. You have to have the injectors that are capable of doing that. That's why when we're doing the math on injector sizing, we don't do it with chassis dyno numbers. Now you could correlate that maybe and go, okay, and this is where experience comes in, particularly experience with a given chassis dyno, because a guy knows that, hey, look, I've run this motor with these injectors and this many cylinders, because the number of cylinders that you make the power output is going to be very important too. If you're trying to make 1,000 horsepower with 4 cylinders, the injectors have to be a lot bigger than trying to make 1,000 horsepower with 8 injectors. They have to be twice as big, obviously. So the number of cylinders that you have and the number of injectors that you have, and also just the number of injectors that you have. If you have a 4-cylinder, but you have 8 injectors because you have a stage injection in it, they can obviously be smaller. So it's the number of injectors that you have that are going to determine how big they have to be for any given power output. But if you have a lot of experience tuning, particularly a lot of guys will have experience tuning one particular combination. Let's say you specialize in coyotes. You go, okay, like when I run coyotes, I run 1000s or 1200s or 1500 cc injectors. And when we run those with the 85 on a turbo, we can usually get to X level, whatever that is. And then we're at, or maybe even a little beyond 100% duty cycle. You learn that, trying that a whole bunch of times, data logging it, having that information, and you go, okay, look, here's how far we can go. You could math that out and go, okay, this amount of chassis dyno power is about this much, what it would be at the flywheel. You can estimate that, use the math, go, oh yeah, that all correlates out. There's no big magic there. It's just that when we're doing stuff on the engine dyno, and then when we're doing stuff NA versus boosted in E85 or other kinds of fuel, methanol would be another thing. Would require way bigger injectors because the amount of fuel flow they have to have. All of that stuff needs to be taken into consideration when you're doing it. And then also, and we haven't really talked about that very much, but the pump comes into play here too. If you're running a bunch of extra fuel pressure because you have boost and you have your fuel pressure regulator referenced, versus boost, which is a good idea, so that fuel pressure rises at a 1-to-1 rate with boost, that means your system pressure is going to be higher. And then the flow needs of the pump, because the flow rate of your pump goes down when you go up in pressure. So the more pressure you're asking it to flow against, basically it's kind of a resistance thing, the less your fuel pump flows. So you make life harder on your fuel pump if you run a lot of fuel pressure. And so that has to be taken into consideration. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And it's important to understand this, though, when we're talking about chassis dyno stuff, when we're talking chassis dyno power numbers versus engine dyno power numbers and the relative fuel flow, when we're calculating that, we calculate it based on the power output that we get at the flywheel and not at the tires, like I said, unless you have a lot of experience with chassis dyno stuff. And then you go, okay, look, on this kind of thing with this much boost or whatever, we make this much power and we have this big of injector and that runs it up to 98% duty cycle and we don't want to go beyond that. That's where lots and lots of years of experience come into play for guys that do a lot of tuning. It's really good stuff. So let's see what you guys got going on here on a Friday night. Untrue. Jet, what's going on? Jordan, what's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? Good to see you guys. What did you guys think about the Brian Tooley cylinder head stuff? Did you guys get some good information from the interview on that stuff? What a horrible start, Patrick. Would should make more sense. Would make more sense than what? Do you have any knowledge of MRP injectors? Do you like them? I don't know what MRP injectors are. I don't know that I've ever tried them. Have you ever do you have an experience with an off-and-house or 360 for a small block Ford? I don't ever remember running one of those, and I don't remember seeing one at WestTech at all. I don't remember anybody running one for a small block Ford. They had some off-and-house or intake manifolds there, but I thought that the ones that I saw were small block Chevy ones. I don't remember seeing a Ford one. The off-and-houser looks like a well-balanced dual plane for a Cleveland. Richard, can you explain the theory behind intake runner length and how it pertains to low versus high RPM? Yeah, Sam, I've gone over this a whole bunch. What happens is that there are a number of distinct, there are at least 3 different forms of charge filling associated with an intake manifold design. The one that's easiest for me to explain for runner length is called reflected wave. And what happens is you have a negative pressure wave that travels up the intake runner length and then travels back as a positive pressure wave. And the length of time that it takes for that wave to travel as a negative pressure wave up and then rarefaction occurs and then travel back as a positive pressure wave, it travels at the speed of sound. But the amount of time that it takes for it to go up and back and arrive at the right time, the time that it takes is a function of that length. So when it's going to arrive relative to piston position is a function of the length. And so at longer lengths, it takes more time and arrives at a different time. And at shorter lengths, it takes less time and arrives at a different time. And that's a function of engine speed. Someone modified to low rise 2.4 barrel. This one's supposedly off of a 302. I don't, like I said, don't ever remember testing an offie on a Ford. I want to be a car guy. Now I'm turning into a mathematician more and more. Well, it's good to have like general math skills. I'm back because my phone died. I feel like I'm late, but I'm feeling good. Good, I'm glad. Did I miss we're live? Yes, you did. People can get picky with chamber design. Brian's a big influence on me. Big fan of the new heads. Really want to build a large displacement LS or LT hybrid. Yeah, he's done a lot of testing so far on those heads, and they look fairly promising. I'm very happy to see the test results from the comparison that he did between those candid valve heads and the trick flow heads that they ported for me, the 220s. Mostly, I mean, I would expect that any head that gets developed after other heads should have all of the information gleaned from the stuff that came before it. And he and Rick and guys are really sharp about head design, so it doesn't surprise me that they're very good. What I was pleasantly surprised about, and we mentioned this in the video, is that there was no loss in low speed power. So for a head that's designed to do what that one does, something that flows 385 CFM in the case of the cathedral port head, I think, with that valve size and stuff, it's just impressive that it didn't lose low speed power. So it's pretty impressive. Is there a power difference between LS9 heads to the LS3? or is the deck thickness and valves the only difference? I honestly haven't tested those back to back, but I would doubt that there would be. 10353, 243 heads, milled 30. What else you recommend to raise compression? You can put a thinner or a smaller bore diameter head gasket on there. That will do it too. You can mill the deck depending on where your piston is. What's better, 4th gen truck injectors versus 4th gen, 3rd gen truck injectors? I don't think you're going to see any difference between those two, other than if you need a bigger injector to supply the fuel for your given power output, you would pick the injector size. I don't think an injector like this 25-pound injector versus this 25-pound injector, I think you'd be splitting hairs there. Max compression recommended on 93 octane. That's not a useful discussion because that's not really the question. The question isn't that. Well, what is your cam timing? What is your dynamic compression? What is your water temperature? What is your air temperature? What kind of chamber design do you have? What is the converter and gearing and vehicle weight? And there's all kinds of things that go into that. Fourier transforms and Fourier series is how to solve wave equations. Finally finished listening to the podcast you did on Sloppy a while ago, all 42 hours of it. It was awesome. Oh, with Matt? Yeah. It was that they were long. Do you think you'll need to be able to test the new BTR, and do you think you will be able to? Yeah, he already said that he would send me a set. We were going to compare them to the 220 on something that I had out here. We were also talking about possibly using them for the 4.8 that I want to make. I want to try to get 500 horsepower with a 4.8, and I think that those heads would certainly do it. And judging by how well they did down low, I was thinking that might be too much head and unnecessary for what we were doing, but it looks like they might work well. Thinking about doing a 4.8 flat top piston. Yeah, a lot of the 5.3s, the aluminum ones, the high output ones, have those flat tops already, like the L33 has that. But yeah, you can put a flat top piston in it. But when you're going for more and more compression, is this going to be a street driven thing, and is it going to be on pump gas? You shouldn't be going all out on compression until you're also looking at the big picture for stuff. Have you ever worked with MRP injectors? I have not. I think I answered that already. I run 93 in all my cars. Could that be a problem? A problem for what? Picked up a set of stock 54 pounders from an LSA. Hope it's enough for 600 at 8 horsepower. Yes, that's enough. That's enough for that. Yeah, I'm not familiar with MRP injectors. Not that I can recall. Let's see. Yeah, I have not used those that I know of. The injectors that we have up on richardoldnerperformance.com, we have all the injector flow data for that. So if you're using them with a factory ECU and stuff, it's pretty easy to get all the information. LS9 swap Mercury Grand Marquis. What mods can I look for 2,000 or less to get me close to 450 to 500 horsepower? On an LQ9, you need a cam and springs, obviously, and you're going to need injectors. That's what I would do. And you could get an LQ9. The 317 heads would be a good thing to replace. You might be able to find some 706 heads or some 799 heads. That would be a big help. Yeah, Travis, you're fine for 600 on the 85. I don't know a huge amount about LT. LA3 heads are decent, I see. How do they compare to other stock LT heads. I'd love to see an LT stock intake shootout one day. I've tested a bunch of LT intake already. The L83s flow the least amount of all of the LT heads. Poland's in the house, porting my 4-liter Ford overhead valve heads. Nice. Are you porting them yourself? And are they? Those are iron heads, right? Or are they aluminum? Building my street engine based off your videos. I've watched stock rebuilt, bottom end, truck Norris cam, VS Racing 78, 75. Yeah, that'll all work good. Just make sure you have enough fuel pump and injector and an intercooler. It's 5 a.m. On the fence for 823 heads for 799s for a 6-liter turbo build on a street strip daily that can make 600 wheel horsepower but capable of 800 on pump and E85. Is there a big low end difference worth considering? Yes, you don't. For one, you don't need 823 heads, and you are going to sacrifice low speed power compared to 799 heads. I don't know what turbo you're thinking about using. Personally, I'd pick the G42 for that. If you were doing an NA one, I would say get the 823 heads and a LS3 intake manifold. If you're doing a turbo, I would say use 799 heads and a truck or a Trailblazer SS, because they will give you better low speed response, and they're not going to stop you from making, especially that kind of power. I mean, that's easy. James, happy to help. Street truck on 93, looking to up power, but not lose too much drivability. Reliable weekend truck only. 220, 224 cam. I hadn't picked the stall yet, thinking 3000. Yeah, you don't need that much stall with a 220 cam, but it will help. And that camshaft, if you keep going up in compression, you're definitely going to run into detonation issues. What's the math you use for ethanol per pound of horsepower? Well, it depends on the brake-specific fuel consumption, but I use half a pound of fuel per hour for gasoline. And then when I get that number, I just multiply it by 0.85, because it's going to be richer when we go to boost. And then I multiply it by 0.75 for E85, because, it's going to take about 25% more fuel to get where we need to go with the E85. I haven't ever done like methanol or anything. I haven't ever tested that. Iron heads, bigger valves. Okay, cool. Got a Marlboro 525 Hellcat pump. 1050 MRP injectors. Yeah, that's more than enough injector for what you're doing. Get away. I got to do more research. I'm looking to grab a great set of stock set of heads and intake LT wise. The L86 intake is better than the L83. The LT1 heads would be better unless you're starting with a 5.3. Then you would want the smaller heads, I think. I have 44-pound injectors. I was looking at my data log, and it was at 48% duty cycle at 5,600 RPM NA at the drag strip. Could this injector support 10 pounds of boost? AFRs are 12.5 to 1 on 93. Yeah, it depends on how much timing you're using and how much power you're going to make. So if you're at 50% duty cycle, roughly, you can make 50% more than you have now. 10 pounds of boost, if you did everything to the math, would be 69 or 70%. So probably not 10 pounds would do it. 7 pounds or 6 pounds probably would be enough. For 6-liter running, 799 heads, boost and low buck truck camshaft should make good low end response. I think the low end power from the low buck is key to combine with 799 heads. Yeah, all of that's good. I mean, if you look at the G42 test that we did even on the 5.3, on a 6-liter, you're going to be golden. A 6-liter with a truck intake or Trailblazer SS intake manifold and that low buck truck camshaft and that G42 turbo, you're going to be just melting the tires if that's what you want. Where can I research more compression wise, or what do you suggest? I don't know what is your question? My question is, why do you want more compression? The more compression that you put in it, the more problems you're going to have, the less reliable you're going to make your combination. So you shouldn't be trying to do that. If you want more power, you should get more power other ways besides going to the extreme with one thing that puts you into the danger zone in terms of tuning. You shouldn't do that. You should put a good camshaft in it. And if you put more camshaft in it, you can get away with more compression. I'm using it as a camping rig, so it should be fine at like 700 horsepower with a good tune on 91 for convenience. I'm in Colorado, and sometimes camping gas stations are sparse. Yeah, the cruise fuel mileage when you're not in boost and stuff is all going to be fine. I have a 4.8. It has a stage 4 cam, but only makes 320 horsepower. What I do to make more power? I wouldn't have that camshaft in a 4.8 ever. Unless I was trying to rev it really, really high and drag race it. $320 seems a little low for a stage 4 cam. I would need to know what the tune is, like how much timing that thing has, what the air fuel is. What are the other things that you have on it? Do you have a truck manifold on it? Do you have stock heads on it? Do you have an air intake on it? Do you have headers? What else is going on there? What makes one engine more sensitive than another engine to timing and air fuel changes, chamber design? Do you mean for power wise? Most engines are not ultra sensitive to air fuel changes. Almost every engine is sensitive to timing in a given range until you get to the optimum amount of timing for that chamber design, because every chamber has a design and wants like a burn rate, and so you need to have that timing happen, so that it happens at the right time at every engine speed. So once you get that curve mapped out, it will work out really well. If you take out timing away from that, it will start making less and less power. But chamber design, air temperature, water temperature, lots of stuff is going on there. Made 473 horsepower at the crank, lifting heads, 160 stock. I'm hoping to build 500 horsepower, kind of living one. O-ring grooves. What Mad Mods? What motor is that you're talking about? I realized my fuel pressure was 48 psi instead of 43 that the injectors are rated at. Would it lower duty cycle if I turn the fuel pressure down to 43? No. What Redline? What kind of motor is this? If it's an LS, you should be at 58 psi at zero vacuum, which is at wide open throttle. If you have 48 psi, you will have more fuel flow through the injector, and so theoretically your duty cycle could be lower. If you add fuel pressure, you add fuel flow. Really learned a ton from your videos. Coming from building small block Chevy engines, LS is way easier platform, way easier to make. Yeah, it's easier to make more power. I mean, if you take and get a wrecking yard 5.3 or whatever and put a camshaft in it, you're way above where if you tried to do that with a small block Chevy. Currently building a 5.8 out of a 5.3, 3900 stroke, 20 over piston with a truck Norris cam. Factory head, factory intake for now. Would you be interested in a dyno date when I finish? Are you asking me if I want to run it? I don't want to run it. For a total daily driver, is a ball bearing turbo a better consideration for longevity? I don't know that there's necessarily a longevity thing to that. I see a lot of factory journal bearing turbos that last a really, really long time, as long as they don't run without oil. But maybe there would be something there. These are interesting considerations because people ask questions about things like that. Oh, if I have this rod ratio or whatever, it'll last longer. I'm like, look, how long are you going to have that? I have 300,000 on mine. I didn't put all of them on there, and I'm certainly not going to have it for another 300,000. So a lot of those things aren't even really considerations because people are concerned about, oh, can I get another? Is it going to last 100 or 200 or 300,000 miles? Why do you care about that? That's not, you're worried about something that's not going to come to play. Was just trying to make up for compression loss due to a 243 head swap. What did you swap it from? If you went from a 706 head to a 243 head, you changed it by 2 or 3 cc's. It was next to nothing. And if you milled the head, you got more than that back. If you milled at 30, you got more than that back. It's completely stock, just stage 4 cam and long tube headers. Okay, I'm assuming that it's tuned though, right? And I'm hoping that it doesn't have stock injectors in it, because that's not enough fuel flow for what you're doing. Why do some dual plane intakes have a notch in the plenum divider? Would that be a better choice for a blow through? I don't know about the necessarily for the blow through thing. The notch in the divider is usually for better power production, a little bit higher in the RPM range. It does usually trade power down low though. It's a sort of transition between a dedicated dual plane and a single plane, erring more toward the dual plane, obviously. Built a 388 stroker for my last build, and for what I put into it, I could have bought an LS and put a cam in it. Would have been equal. Eric, you went 63 on your Trail 70, your 125 Trail 70. Nice. That's pretty fast. 4-liter, oh, Explorer engine. Okay, yeah, I got it. What would you guess 9-to-1 2-valve Cleveland with Edelbrock Performer and heads would make at the crank? I don't have any idea because I don't know what cam that is. I know 25-pound injectors leaves a lot on the table for a 5.7 with the truck nose cam. We'll definitely do 33 to 50 injectors after I get a spare transmission built to handle the max power output. Yeah, 25 will do 400, but you're probably over that on a 5.7. Well, and they'll do more than 500 because your brake specific is going to be better than that. So let's say it's 425 or 430 or something, 440. You should probably be there though with a 5.7, I would think. What are all the advantages you see with an LS versus a small block Chevy? Yeah, I'm not going to go into all that. We have videos up that show comparisons between those. The biggest advantage for me, for the average guy, is that you can go to a wrecking yard and get a 5.3, and if you find an aluminum one, you can get an all aluminum motor. But even if you got one that had aluminum heads and a composite intake manifold, and you put a cam and springs in it, it's going to make anywhere from 425 to 450, and you can't go do that with a small block Chevy. You can't go get a small block Chevy in the wrecking yard and put a cam in it and make that much power. Not with any of them. Have you ever used an LS3 stock 65-pound injector? I'm thinking about getting them for my turbo build since people sell them often with LS3 intakes. I didn't think that an LS3 was 65 pounds. I thought an LS3 was a 46-pound injector. I didn't know of any factory 65-pound injector. Yeah, 42. That's what I thought that they were. Yeah, so I would be leery of that unless it's a LS9 or an LSA maybe. Maybe those are bigger. 5-ton Magnum has Excel injectors in it running Holley EFI. She'll be making around 260. Okay. Engine Masters has a video on rod ratio. Does the notch in the divider reduce carb signal? It does reduce carb signal. That's what I was saying. It loses power down low, and then makes it better up top. What size fuel pump would I need for 600 to 800 horsepower, and will 80-pound injector be enough? For what kind of fuel? For gas, it's enough. You might be able to get away with, well, I don't know if you'd be able to get away with one Hellcat pump. Probably have to have two of those. 2 525s. Iron blocks are better for boost. They're not. an aluminum 5.3 block is really, really good for boost. None of the other, well, all the other aluminum blocks could be used for boost too. It depends on how much boost you want. Michael, what's going on? Cleveland Performer headers 268, 218 cam. I don't know. It's a 351 and not a 302. I would think somewhere near 400 probably. Maybe less than that, less than 400. Richard, hopefully next year I can get 2 or 3 dyno runs and share my results in the truck. That'd be cool. Anyone familiar with Holley Terminator harness? I mean, we've run a few of those, but I don't know if you're what specific question you have. The 24X LS6, LS1, LS6 harness for the EV6 injectors. Do I need to get LS1, LS6 specific sensors? If you have that harness, you're putting it on a motor, an early Gen 3 motor then, right? That has a 24X trigger wheel on the crank. And that has the, because that harness will also have the rear plug for the cam sensor. The injectors don't matter because the injector harness is separate. It plugs into the main harness. And so you can get whatever injector harness you want for whatever injectors you have, either EV1s or EV6s. If you have an EV6 injector harness, then you need to get EV6 injectors. Otherwise, the sensors, and then you need the right cam and crank sensor for a Gen 3 motor. And then injectors and TPS is going to be the same unless you're not doing a drive-by-wire. So it'll be a manual mechanical TPS, or mechanical throttle body. The TPS, the IAC are all going to be the same. The coolant temp sensor is going to be the same. I don't remember if that LS1 has an air temp sensor. Maybe it does. Those are all the same. Those all plug in the same. The only big things are the cam and crank sensor. Oh yeah, knock sensors too. We don't normally run those on the engine dyno, but the knock sensor position is different. On the Gen 4 harness, the knock sensors are on the side, and on the Gen 3 they're on the top, and we don't use those. A lot of the other ones we don't use also, like fuel pressure and that kind of stuff. We don't plug ever and fuel or oil pressure and fuel pressure. We don't plug any of that stuff ever in. Yeah, if you have a Gen 3, then you're good, Andrew. So if they go to the junkyard and find the sensors off of Gen 3, you'll be good. Yeah, that should be fine, as long as they're good. Yeah, you're not running knock sensors. We don't normally plug those in. But Gen 3 is an 0353. It is Gen 3. So considering doing a stroker 5.7 Hemi and shooting for 750 wheel horsepower, MMX sells a 360 stroker claims it's capable of 1200. My question is, do you think this is a valid claim? Yeah, if they and the stroker doesn't make a difference. We've made that much power. I think maybe not 1200. We've done with a stock 5.7 from the wrecking yard with ring gap in it. We've made over 1000. So making the power doesn't need to be a stroker. If you put, and we probably could get to 1200, I think, with a stock one. It's not the way that I would run it though, because they have fairly thin ringlands on the Hemi. But if you just put 4 draws and pistons in your 5.7 without a more expensive stroker kit, and then put a cam in it and ported heads, or even if you didn't do ported heads, the stock Hemi heads flow enough. 1200 wheel horsepower is just picking the right turbos then. Andrew, happy to help, man. Co-worker with a turbo Acura might wind up having to let it go after the turbo shelled. Found one, but the dealer won't fix the ECU coos. Uh-oh. Got the right one. Yeah, an 03 is a 5.3. I have an 02 in my truck. My truck is the Deuce. Does your 03 have a drive-by-wire throttle body? I entered my 86 S10 L33 with 5-speed in a classic car auction for tomorrow, pretty much to see what it might be worth. I put a high reserve on it. Doesn't that cost you money though to put it in the auction? Don't you have to pay for that? Really enjoyed the interview with Brian the other day. I like the technical details and hearing the theory behind his head design. Yeah, he's sharp. He's done a lot of stuff. He's done a lot of cylinder head stuff. Yeah, I've known Brian a long time. Yeah, he's good people. Rick too, also there. I don't spend as much time with Rick, but I've known him from way back with the trick flow stuff. 03 is drive-by-wire, yeah. I think 02 was the last year of the, although they probably, knowing GM, did weird things for different like chassis though. Giving my father a sloppy best cam with some other goodies for his 4.8 Ranger, getting a 5.3 LSA blower as a daily. Put a 60-year-old in his place. Yeah. I don't know that I would pick that cam for a 4.8, but it'll be fun. It's a 219 cam, so it's pretty good size for a 4.8. I like smaller cams for this. Oh, maybe I'm confused there. You said 4.8 Ranger, but is he putting a 5.3 with the blower in it? That will be fun if that's the case. That'll be better. What would be the difference in horsepower between a floating pin and a press pin? Probably nothing. Probably you would not be able to measure that. What are your thoughts on boost and performance 454 LS engines? They're claiming 800 horsepower NA. That's possible with that power out, with that displacement, but it'd be a really, really high strung kind of deal. Brian did one that made over 700 that he drove on the street, but even that one was like 12-to-1 static. So it'd have to be, to make 800 horsepower, it'd have to be a really, really big camshaft and very high compression and a high RPM thing. When is the 4.6 Big Bang going to happen? I don't know. How reliable do you think recommended RPM range is on cams and intakes? I don't think that they're accurate at all, because it doesn't tell you anything. If they tell you that the RPM range for the cam is 1200 to 5800 or whatever, that's just not, I don't know what that's telling you. That, yeah, the motor will rev through that range, but it's not making peak power or peak torque or necessarily good power or torque or whatever in those ranges. And also, the camshaft isn't the only thing that dictates that. If you ran a small cam with a short runner intake manifold, it's going to rev a lot higher and make power a lot higher than running that same cam with a dual plane intake or a long runner intake. So there's a lot of things that go into that. I use that as a rough estimation of kind of how big the camshaft is. Early LS had press fits, later had floating. Yeah, the Gen 3 stuff was pressed and the Gen 4 was floating. I ran lots of Big Bang tests, 3 of them on the Gen 3 floating stuff. I mean, on the Gen 3 press pin stuff, and the weaker rods and the weaker block and all that. And you can make a lot of power with those. When the problem is that when somebody reads that, they go online and they read that, oh, the Gen 4 is better. Yeah, it is. but you only want to make 700. And so either one of them will do that. That's not, you don't have to get the better one because it's better. If you want to, if you have nothing and that's your choice and you can get one of those at a wrecking yard, yeah, get the Gen 4 one. I mean, you got to make sure that you have all the other stuff for that. But yeah, get that one. That's fine. But if you have a Gen 3 and you want to put a turbo on it and a cam and springs, just do that. It will be fine. Is there any loss in power in a turbo engine while spooling the turbo compared to an NA engine? If you're spooling the turbo and it has positive pressure, you're making more power than the NA motor. The Gen 4 is better, but the Gen 3 is still good. I've got a crossfire intake off my 82 Camaro. What about using it for twin carbs? Do you have any info on the intakes? Are they any good? They're not good. I have one, and if you look at it, the openings in the ports where it goes down to the cylinder heads is really small, and so they don't flow a whole bunch. The plate on top of it doesn't flow much unless the openings for the throttle bodies are not very big. So if you made a new plate, you could improve upon that by putting carburetors on there. You could do a DZ302 kind of thing. It's not going to make the power that other manifold does, but and then you'd have to probably do some porting down to, if you put any kind of reasonable cylinder head on it, you're going to have to make changes to the intake manifold. Do you think it's worth the money to have a shop assemble a rotating assembly on a stock block, or just DIY with some stock bearings and stock journal sizes? I assemble all of my stuff. Well, I take that back. I don't assemble all of my stuff. I usually do, just for a time thing. Sometimes the machine shop will do it if I'm pressed for time or I'm going to be away from WestTech or whatever for a while. I will have them do that. But if you feel comfortable doing that, you obviously can. Do you have any videos on how to pick the right fuel pump? No, I don't have. I haven't done a fuel pump flow thing for a long time, and I don't remember doing a video on that. I did magazine stories on that because Kenny Bell still has it, I think, has a fuel pump dyno. So they have a fuel flow thing for different pumps that they can adjust pressure and pressure in and out and voltage and all kinds of stuff. And so we did a whole bunch of fuel pump tests to find out what the flow rate was and then what the attending power potential was. Have you tried any of the MBE stuff? No, I don't think I have. Can we take a minute to appreciate the new C801 engine? Yeah, no, those are impressive. I mean, 1,000 horsepower stuff is really, really impressive. Getting a 5.3 with an LSA supercharger, it currently has a 4.8. Okay, so if you're replacing the 4.8 with a 5.3 and the 5.3 has a blower on it, that's just like nothing but good. Why would Edelbrock not just the shaft valve train with their Buick heads? Isn't the shaft style more stable? Are you revving a Buick 455 to where you would need a shaft style rocker? I mean, since we're running, if you look at what you're doing with an LS or a small block Chevy or a big block Chevy or whatever, look at the RPMs that you're running for that. I don't know guys that are running Buicks that high. How good do we have horsepower junkyard engines, or it doesn't matter which engine because it's relative? You need a really nice small block to make 400 horsepower. Now it's a junkyard 5.3 with a cam. Yeah, a 400 horsepower small block is usually a heads, cam, and intake kind of thing. Better hanging on the wall. And it is cool, Crazy Foot, but it's gonna, just so you know, going in, if you took and built a motor, don't do a 383, but if you built a 350 or something and it had decent heads on it, like an Airflow Research Enforcers or something on there, and it had a 268 cam or 274 cam, and then you put your fancy Crossfire on there with 2 carburetors on there and ran it, and then took that off and put an RPM air gap on it, I would say the RPM air gap is going to be up by quite a bit. What's your opinion on using plastic gauge versus inside out mics for what? I've built lots of Bonneville motors with plastic gauge and it works fine. If you're able to do a fuel pump video, could you also measure the electric draw and wire temp? It's a lot of work. So when the answer is big is safer. Yeah, we won't do that. We won't do wire temp. We will just tell you to use big wire. Don't use speaker wire. No, I agree. Not revving it high. Just curious why the factory used it and Edelbrock didn't. I think that they did. Didn't Edelbrock want to put a more affordable rocker assembly on there? Did they make the Buick head so that it would accept like small block Chevy rockers or something? Deutschwerks has a new 650 pump that they're claiming big flow numbers from at different voltages. Yeah, if you change the voltage, if you go from 12 to 14 to 16, 18, 20 volts, like that's what a booster pump does, you increase the speed of the pump and you change the flow rate dramatically. And that's one of some of the testing that we did when I was doing the stuff with Kenny Bell, is that we tested it with and without their booster pump, and it makes a dramatic change at 17 volts. And then when you wick it up to 20 volts, it's a lot. Switch it to a single carburetor. It runs amazing. Yeah, and that's normally the. I mean, if we saw that, not to pick on the Crossfire stuff, which looks amazing, especially like the oval air cleaner assembly that comes with that. Tune port is the same way. If you take the tune port manifold off and put a dual plane manifold on there, it picks up a lot of power. When you use plastic gauge, it works fine. Why do people hate on plastic gauge? It's the same reason people hate on anything. You know, they use something else, so whatever they use is better because they use it. Makes sense about the Buick. I think that's why they did that, Sergeant. If I remember right, I kind of remember Freiberger talking about that in a story that he wrote about it. Anyone had plastic gauge show bad clearances and needed to get different bearings? I have had to switch bearings because of clearances that I measured with plastic gauge when I was doing all the Honda stuff. But Hondas have specific bearings. They do their bearing dimension changes. They indicate that based on color. So you have pink bearings and red bearings and brown bearings and green bearings and all that stuff. A lot of guys just put the same ones in everything. But if you look on the block, you will see that there's an indicator on what on the main bearings and the rod bearings, what bearings went in with that. So when they're assembling it, everything is assembled so that it has the correct tolerances. And they juggle bearings to do that. It's more expensive and time consuming to do that, but that's why they were so awesome. And we continued to do that. What's your opinion on full floating versus press pin? I think for a production LS thing, I don't think it makes any difference. I don't think that's why there's a strength issue difference between a Gen 4 and a Gen 3. I don't think that has anything to do with it. It has more to do with the rod design, and I think also the piston design, and not that part of it. I can say on the Gen 4 stuff, I think that when we've taken those apart, and that might have been the ones that we took apart, and it might have been the fact, since they were Gen 4, that they probably had fewer miles on them. But most of the Gen 3 press stuff that I've had seem to be bound more, because what you get is buildup. Because when the piston's going up and down and moving, the rod is only moving on the piston a certain amount, only the amount that is required for the way that the crank is going. And it can move more than that. If you take the rod assembly and rod and piston assembly off of the crank, the rod can move a lot more than that. Well, it doesn't do that when you take it off, because the areas where it wasn't moving has got stuff on there now. And so it stops it from doing that. I don't remember the floating stuff being like that. I wish there was an inline 6 version of the K series. Made a bass tune. Yeah, the Bear is not quite that. Made a bass tune for my 5.9 Magnum, pulling 1 degree for every 1 pound of boost until 10, then 2 for every pound after that. It's running 31 degrees total NA. Yeah, that should be a good start. Are you running it on pump gas? So 31, you're down to 21. If you're running on pump gas, I don't think I would run 21 degrees of timing on 10 pounds of boost on pump gas. Certainly not at the torque peak. Got a couple more minutes. I never even put a poll up. Press pins are less likely to get into the cylinder wall. You mean if you break a clip or something? I have never had a clip go bad. I've damaged them putting them in and taking them out, but I don't think I've ever had one go bad while running. 5.3 truck plus cam LSA blower Ranger, better than a turbo. Simplicity and power. I'm a turbo guy. Dad isn't. He's lazy. It's not better than a turbo. There's not. You shouldn't use that vernacular. That doesn't matter. Not one doesn't have to be better than the other. The question is, the thing that you're putting together with the blower, is he going to dig that, and is he going to like, jamming his foot in it and having the tire spin? Because that's probably what's going to happen. So will it satisfy that need? Yeah, more likely than yes. Will you make more power at the same amount of boost on a turbo? Yes, you definitely will. But it will do something different than that blower will. And again, like we were talking about, Gen 3 versus Gen 4, if you have a Gen 3 and it's already doing what you want, there's no reason to go to a Gen 4. If you have a blown 5.3 and it's already doing what you want, don't worry about the fact that, oh, a turbo would be better. And again, it depends on your definition of better. I want a K series with 2 extra cylinders. Yeah, that's a V8 would be better. A V8K would be good. 93 is I start pulling 2 degrees after 7 psi. Yeah, to give you an idea on pump gas, I think Matt was saying that he runs like 14 degrees of timing at 14 pounds of boost, and that's at the horsepower peak. So it's less at the torque peak. So it'd be more like 10 degrees, let's say, at the torque peak on pump gas. So you can figure that out and see where you want to do all that. Yeah, and the LSA bolts on, it's, it's all contained. Why does an LY6 make more power than an LQ9? It has everything that's better than an LQ9, other than compression. It has way more head flow. It has a different camshaft. It has a way better intake manifold. So it's all good stuff. What's the small block Ford port EFI equivalent to a carb Edelbrock air gap RPM power wise? The RPM2 EFI is really close to that. And it has a whole video on the timing curve deal. Barra makes power as if the K series had 2 more cylinders. What's an NA Barra make? Somebody did a V8 K series. I remember talking to the guy. The 3800 is better than all of them. I don't know about that. I do like them though. I like all of the engines. They're all my children. You're gonna do a turbo 400M? Yeah, that's not real high on the list. I would definitely be worried about stock rods on a 400M with as long as they are. A 460 turbo would be good. I think that the guys that listen to all of these discussions have done that. Oh, KE, I'm sorry to hear that, man. about that guy. What about stock rods on a Cleveland? A stock rod on a Cleveland's not as long as a 400, right? Or is it just the compression height on the piston? I thought that a 400M had a really tall deck and a really long rod. So a bear is 4 liters, right? So if it was doing what a K-Series Honda does, it would make 400 horsepower. It's not doing that. What's the next test going to be? Well, on Wednesday, I'm going to see Jimmy, so we're going to do a bunch of testing. We got a bunch of chassis dyno testing to do. A 2-liter Honda makes 200 horsepower. So that would mean a 4-liter Barrow would have to make 400 horsepower. Otherwise, it's not like a K-Series. And it's not. It doesn't have VTEC. It doesn't have any of that. I'm not putting down a Barrow. I like them. I think that they're really cool. And guys have made 1 million horsepower with them. I'm just saying that that's not an equivalent thing. It's not what a K-Series is, which is, it's not alone in that. There are very, very few engines out there do what that one does, or even an F-Series, even more so. 240 horsepower at 2 liters is a pretty high specific output. Molnar makes an HPM rod for 400, 6.5. That is pretty long, huh? Thanks for the 6-liter for the cam tip. Oh, thank Jimmy for that. Yeah, we got a bunch of stuff we're doing. I got a whole list of stuff that we are going over. Hopefully the turbo kit will be done and we'll be running that on the Tahoe. What is it time? Is it time? Huh? Do you know when an hour is up? Do you know that? Huh? Hello, 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 oh, hello. He's like, come. Hello, hello. I know. Hello. You know, hold on to my arm. I know. Boy, good boy. Okay. He tells me when it's time. He calls time, huh? Near. Big fan of inline 6-cylinders. I know. I want to run the. I've got some 6-cylinders I want to run, and I have a list of videos that I have that will go up very soon. Regular videos that are not live feeds. Honda K has great flowing head, good compression. That's why they're so effective. Well, and it has 2 cam profiles and has variable cam. So it has a lot of stuff going for it. I know I'm even going to go and we're going to test some JDM stuff. I'm going to go over to where Jimmy was. Hopefully, I get to check out some of the 2J stuff and some of the RB stuff, and so that would be cool. I love that stuff. Got a possible S10 with a LS swap, maybe a Conquest with an LS swap. Lots of, I mean, I'm excited. Plus, there's lots of snakes in Georgia. Power Nation did some good videos on 300 on the Ford. Yeah, they did. They do. And they did a turbo on the big block Ford too, I think, which is cool. 200 horsepower per liter. Yes. Well, it's 100 horsepower per liter, but 200 horsepower per liter would be really nice. That's kind of harder to do. On that note, I will see you guys all tomorrow. I got to go get Brady.